Hi, welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Dr. Paul Harrison. Dr. Harrison is an expert on consumer behavior. And before we get started, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
You know, sometimes finding yourself starts right in your own backyard. Moorpark College will help you get back to work at a career you love. I found it. My dream job in biotechnology. I learned the skills that changed my life in just 1 year. Now I'm doing what I love and making more money than ever. Enroll now and follow your dream. I found it. So can you at moorparkcollege.edu/CE.
Dr. Harrison, thank you for coming on.
It's a pleasure, Marcus. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. If you wouldn't mind, can you tell us a little bit about your field of discipline and some of the work that you've done?
Sure. So I'm an academic, a researcher in consumer behaviour. I tend to like to think that I use that research for good. So most of my research is around well-being and how we can basically understand marketing at one end and how it affects human behaviour, and at the other end how we can use the kind of marketing activities for good. And I always think about it as if you're trying to get people to practice good behaviours, you basically look at it similarly to a marketing problem, which is how do you influence their behaviours to push them away from the bad behaviour to the good behaviour. And at the moment, most of my research is in the area of things like public health, large kind of population change, and I tend to work with teams from a whole range of different areas. My kind of main area in public health is around obesity, although I have done some research around smoking cessation, and also, as we kind of all know, around how you use behavioural knowledge to influence behaviour in relation to a pandemic like COVID-19.
When it comes to consumer, or I guess the psychology behind consumer behaviors, if you wouldn't mind, maybe could you maybe describe what that tangibly looks like to someone that might not understand how much thought and I guess purposefulness that goes on in supermarkets? Maybe if you wouldn't mind, maybe a little bit describing why, at least I guess to start off with the supermarket, why it's structured the way that it is, and how maybe people might not be understanding the kind of system that exists and how they potentially could fall into it, so to speak.
Sure. So, a supermarket is a very controlled environment. And one of the things I often think about is the nature of power. So when an individual consumer walks into a supermarket, there is this belief, and it kind of comes with, the development of things like ego and the kind of issue of the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, or the kind of rational part of the brain, that we're in control of our decision making. When in fact most of our decision making is automatic, it's outside our reflective capacity, so we don't know what's influencing our behaviour. If you think about that as an individual and the complexities of what it is to be human and all of the other things that you're grappling with in a general kind of life and day, supermarkets are very controlled, organised, thoughtful contexts in which they've designed spaces to push you towards making choices that benefit them. And with supermarkets particularly, it is about getting you not to think about your decision making. The best way to influence behaviour is to make it feel like you've made the choice, that you're in control, that you've determined those choices. And, a very simple example might be shelf placement, for example. So generally speaking, it's just easier to process information that is really at eye level, a little bit above eye level, and around 30 to 40 degrees below eye level. And so you're more likely to choose a product that's easy to process than a product that's difficult to process. So that's why you will often see products that don't return a good margin to the supermarket in a kind of place where you have to force yourself to look up or look down. And that's, a very simple thing. But I think one of the things I need to always kind of reinforce to people is that we would like to think that our decision making is driven by rational choices, when in fact they're driven by evolutionary processes, which include reducing the amount of thinking that requires, because thinking requires energy, and humans don't like to use energy. And supermarkets themselves are, I don't know, what would you call it, petri dishes of experiments, and supermarkets are constantly manipulating environments to see what has the best return in terms of margins. And particularly for supermarkets, margins are the key. So if they can get somebody to spend 2 cents more on a product or on a particular product, which gives them a 2 cent more profit, and we get 100,000 people spending that 2 cents more, then you suddenly get quite a substantial profit. And it is all about the big kind of aggregate numbers of people making choices.
So without necessarily getting too simplistic, because obviously, I mean, you have a PhD in this field, and you can't just boil everything down to a simple sentence. But so I guess what you're kind of talking about is, let's say someone, and forgive me, I mean, I'm sure you've probably heard of Walmart, but I'm thinking of a place like a Walmart or Target. Let's say you go into a store like that, and you're looking for some kind of lampshade and maybe a thing of water or something like that. So then when you walk out of the store, you have the lampshade, you have the water, you have a couple things of soda, you have some chips, you have a couple frozen meals. Is that kind of like, let's say when it comes to consumer spending, is that something that's more common or less common? Is that people will walk out of a store having purchased more than, let's say, they initially intended to purchase?
Yeah, so stores are set up to influence your decision making once you're there, and there are different techniques that people can use to reinforce the likelihood that they'll only buy what they need. But for the most part, once you've, and we call it investment theory or psychological investment theory, but basically once you've invested in the process of getting into the supermarket, there is a whole, I guess, process that goes on in your head, which is, well, while I'm here, I'll buy this, this, and this, and then a form of self-justification. And that justification comes partly from the environment and partly from, you know, a process where you're saying, I'll reduce the amount of energy that I'll need to expend later if I need to come back. We then do this thing, basically, it's kind of an after post hoc rationalisation. We rationalise why we're making the purchases. But in reality, those choices that we've made to buy things other than the lamp and the soda have happened through, you know, what I might call your autobiography. You're already predisposed to buying those things. It's just that all the supermarket has done is nudged you towards it, made it a little easier for you to make that choice. And these places like Walmart, places like Target, places like Ikea, for example, they put a lot of effort into reducing what we might call risk. So, you know, for a lot of people, it's not seen as a big risk to buy. I mean, IKEA is big in Australia, so it's not a big risk to buy a bag of the tea candles, for example. And people go, I'll need them, I always need them. Even if you didn't go to IKEA to buy those tea candles. If you go into a place like Walmart, one of the really interesting, having spent a little bit of time in the US and been to a couple of Walmarts, one of the big things about Walmart is that it has this effect which can sometimes be called ego depletion, which basically means that you're overwhelmed with so much stimuli that you don't make what we might call rational choices. You don't make thoughtful choices. You make choices based on your emotion. And the environment is set up to do that. There's a lot of light. There's a lot of noise. There's actually a lot of space as well, I've noticed in a lot of the Walmarts. So basically what you're doing is, because your body is regulating a whole bunch of other stimuli, you're less likely to be able to use the energy that you might normally use to make good decisions. And that's a form of ego depletion. There's another term that's sometimes used called the Gruen transfer, which basically means that when you walk into a overstimulated environment, you transfer your thinking from rational, thoughtful thinking to emotional, gut type thinking, and therefore you're just more likely to be persuaded to buy things that you wouldn't buy if you had the energy and the capacity to think about it.
So, I mean, in the United States, and I'm not exactly sure what stores are like in Australia in this sense, but like, in the United States, when there's these stores like a Walmart and Target, they're kind of a little bit of an everything type of store. I mean, they might not have every specific niche item, but it's very common for a Walmart, let's say, that will sell some stuff for a car. They'll sell stuff for your home, like pillows and sheets and blankets and all that stuff. Then they have food. Then they have clothing, games, shoes. I mean, they kind of have a little
I've
bit.
seen snow plows.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. They have fishing rods. I mean, they have so much stuff that yeah, I mean, when you walk in there, I mean, it's very easy. It seems like, at least in the States, where, yeah, you go in there for maybe a big item, or you go in there for, I don't know, Band-Aids and hydrogen peroxide or something like that. And then you buy a lot of stuff that you probably weren't intending on. And I guess one question I have is, are supermarkets and stores like that, are they dependent upon people purchasing things that they didn't intend to purchase when they walked in? Or is that, as some people would say, kind of like like gravy? Like, is that just something that's a little extra? Or is their whole industry predicated upon that?
The industry is built on that. And I think you kind of summed it up by saying it's easy. So making it easy for people to do things is the holy grail of particularly fast-moving consumable goods retailers like Walmart, supermarkets, those kinds of things. Because if we feel something is easy, it's more likely that we will buy it. Humans are best thought of as golden retrievers or Labradors. We tend to prefer to just not do anything, to laze around. We have evolved, and that's a nice thing, to have things like aspiration and desires and things like that. But deep down, we want our lives to be easy. We want it to be as simple as possible. And there is a little bit, I guess, of a contradiction that goes on in the supermarket or in a big store like Walmart, which is they give you the impression that your life is going to be a whole lot easier if you buy all your things in this place. But on the other hand, it has being in those places has a significant drain on the thinking part. So, I mean, we also exist in a culture, particularly, in places like the US, in Australia, in the UK, where the general discourse, the conversation is built around life should be easy. We shouldn't have to expend any effort to do anything. I think things like Uber, for example, or even the invention of the remote control for a television, that is built around this idea of if we make our life easier, we have more time to do the things that we want to do. When in fact everybody knows that even if you have an easy life, you still seem to have a lot to do. So you've kind of got a juxtaposition. One of them is this idea that we are fed this belief that life should be simple, that we should be constantly trying to simplify our lives, which is pushed up against the only way that you can do that is to continue to consume. And governments themselves are built around this whole idea that consumption is important, it feeds into the economy. Therefore, consuming itself is sometimes kind of presented as a public service. And the market itself, big organisations like Walmart or Target or any of these kind of big retailers, they benefit from that belief system. So it's not just them doing things, it's the general culture just generally saying this is a good thing to do. If you can buy things, you should buy things. And we're a product of that. We don't enter into any decision as an empty vessel. We go into most of our decisions a product of the culture and the society in which we live. And they're kind of building on that. And then what they're doing at a micro level is they're manipulating the environment to make it easier for us to make the decisions that benefit them.
So let's say, for example, if I was going to start a retail company from the ground up and I didn't know anything about it, I didn't know anything about the industry, what would be some of the keys? Like, let's say, and I hired you as a consultant. I said, Dr. Harrison, I want your help to make this make me money? So, and you said, sure, okay,
I probably wouldn't, but anyway, go on.
but if theoretically, or someone in your field,
okay,
if that were to happen, what would be
Yeah.
some of the things that you would, I guess, that teach you about, like let's say like colors, for example, or end caps, or pricing, things of that nature. Like, what would be some of the tips and hints you would give me if that were theoretically something that was happening?
Well, I think the first thing, and this doesn't feed into those very specific manipulations you can do in a space, but I always say to people, who is your market? So who are you trying to get to buy your product? Because I think that's the first question you need to be thinking about is, why would whatever it is that you're making or whatever, why would somebody buy your product? What problems does your product or your space, your shopping centre, your store, whatever, what problems did it solve that aren't already being solved by something else? Because the real difficulty you have is that you don't enter into any market, any environment as a new offer. People might already be solving whatever problem you're trying to solve with different things. So the key question as a consultant that I do consulting is that I say, who is your market, beyond demographics, beyond age, or the group that they might belong to, like millennial or whatever, but actually describe to me the kind of person who you think will buy your product. Tell me what problem you're solving with your offer. And then the next step is to say, why would they choose your offer when they already are having that being given to them in a whole bunch of other ways? What is it about your offer that makes you better? We don't think about that a lot. And a lot of entrepreneurs, we hear a lot about successful entrepreneurs, but, I would say the majority of people who see themselves as entrepreneurs fail. Now, that's, me as a researcher would say the likelihood of being successful as an entrepreneur is tiny. But we hear the good stories. We hear about Richard Branson or something like that. We don't hear about the other 100,000 people who also thought they had a great idea and it wasn't successful. The issue that I then kind of say to them is, you also have to be passionate about what you're trying to achieve here, particularly if you're starting out. It's a really bad idea to start a business because you want to make lots of money, because that's not going to sustain you. And it's not going to be able to keep you energized doing what you're doing if it's only about money. You should do it because you believe what you're doing is solving a problem for people. Then I would say, as that company gets bigger, this is when you can start bringing in some of the manipulations and the tricks of the trade. And I noticed that you talked about things like end cap displays, how they kind of, end cap displays are those kind of things that you see at the end of an aisle. They work as an anchoring technique, which is they give people a pricing anchor to help them to make judgments about the other products that they might come across in time. And a good way to think about anchoring is, generally speaking, when we try to understand or try to work out the price of something, we're looking for reference points. And I'll try and use an example that might be familiar with the listeners in the US. But, you might kind of say to somebody, so I think that the Golden Gate Bridge is 70 metres above the water in San Francisco. What do you think? And what happens is that 70 metres or 70 yards becomes a reference point for people to decide what they think the height might be. Whereas if I had said, I think that the road above on the Golden Gate Bridge is about 25 yards above the water, that 25 becomes an anchor for people to make judgments. And we've done all sorts of experiments, and lots of experiments to be done in this area that show that people use that reference point to help them to work out what their answer might be. And that's how an end cap display works. If it says $3.99 and then you walk down the aisle and there are things for $2.99 or $2 or $4, then that kind of makes sense to you. You use that $3.99, sometimes, completely irrelevant reference point to help you to make judgments about the pricing in that aisle. And some really interesting studies have been done even around things like reference points that people use in bidding in auctions. And they get people to say the last 3 digits of their social security number. And those 3 digits become a reference point for how much they're willing to bid on things like coffee cups. And I think they use things like thumb drives and things like that, that people who had higher social security numbers tended to bid higher prices for those items than people who had lower social security numbers. That said, these kinds of things only work in environments where you already have large numbers of customers, that you're able to manipulate a whole bunch of different contexts and areas. So they're kind of cute and quirky, but if the question is, if I was starting a business today, they're the kinds of things that I would wait until you're big like Walmart or big like Target before you started thinking about those things. It really is about knowing who your customers are, developing a program or developing a marketing offer that you think is going to replace something that they're already using that solves a problem for them. And that requires quite a lot of thinking, because often we're very committed to the things that we love and the products that we develop. So it is more about getting an outsider to help you to understand, what people think of your offer, what problems they think you're solving, and what they think about the competition and why they choose yours instead of another.
I mean, your answer was very robust. There's certainly a lot to break down, but one thing that you said that I think is also very fascinating, or there's several things, but one thing that you said was just the idea of, solving a problem. And I think for a lot of people, especially if we're talking about the supermarket realm, they'd probably say, oh, well, you sell food because you're hungry and you sell drinks because you're thirsty. And I mean, yeah, that's, I guess if you really boil it down simplistically, sure. But I mean, if we're going a little bit deeper level, you might say, okay, well, here's chips, and here's the various forms of chips. Maybe some people like hot chips, so here's a hot chip for that. And here's, you like potato chips, you like pretzels, you like whatever the type of chip it is. But I was thinking, like, when you were saying the idea of, meeting a specific need, like, and I don't know why I thought of something like, let's say, I don't know, toilet paper. And let's say if a corporation wanted to break into that field now, like whoever it is, I mean, I'm trying to think of what kind of corporation would want to get into the toilet paper realm that's not already there. But just trying to get market space. And I feel like this is such a fascinating idea too, because, you mentioned the idea about entrepreneurship, but it's in so many fields. I wonder if there is, I'm trying to think of how to say it correctly. Like, I wonder if in certain product realm that is there an opportunity to even offer something that isn't already being offered. So like, again, if I'm thinking about toilet paper, okay, there's, if you want soft, there's soft. If you want super cheap, there's super cheap. If you want something that's made, entirely with like environmentally concerned toilet paper, that exists. I mean, there's kind of a lot of different options. Like, I mean, I guess I think about that field, or I think about even a field like, I don't know, let's say literal potato chips, like Lay's potato chips.
Yep.
I mean, you can have some that allegedly are healthier. You can have some that only have a couple ingredients. You can have barbecue version, this version, that version. And it does begin, and I don't know, in my mind, I begin to think like, well, what is the answer that can be solved? Like, are there certain industries where it's just, or certain product lines that they have all the answers?
Look, I think that would be one path to go down, to say everything that is needed is there. But I also think sometimes it's useful to think about things that make you uncomfortable about your choices. So you use the example of toilet paper, and I think that's a good one because, until recently, toilet paper was made from old growth forests, basically. But what happened was that, nearly every new idea comes from a combination of a whole bunch of different, what we might call disciplines. So, in Australia, we have a brand of toilet paper called Who Gives a Crap. And it's actually, okay. I don't know if it's kind of distributed around the world, but they kind of built their brand around this idea of actually people do care. who gives a crap is an Australian thing, which is, who cares? But what their thing is that they actually built their brand around the fact that there will be people out there who are willing to maybe spend a little bit more to get paper that is made from recyclable products, but also then profits go back to programs around the world that feed into creating kind of toilets for people in developing countries and things like that. They also then said there will be another group of people who use toilet paper who will want to give a crap, who want to care, but also don't want to have sore bottoms, who want soft toilet paper. So they then kind of started creating a sub-product which is made from bamboo. And, bamboo, from what I understand, my very basic understanding of it, is that it's a much more, it has less impact on the environment than perhaps old growth forests. So they didn't say all the toilet paper decisions have been made, therefore let's not get into it. They said, okay, there's a group of people out there who care about the environment. All of them have bottoms. All of them do pooping. Somehow we need to bring those two things together. And it is those kind of aha moments. And, in my MBA classes, because I teach into the MBA at Deakin University, and in my classes, I always kind of use the example of the development of things like the iPod, which is that, if you had asked customers back in 2000 or asked people who listened to music back in 2000 what they wanted from their music listening problem, what problems did they need solved in terms of music, I would guarantee that nearly 100% of people would have said we need longer cassette tapes, because we can only listen to 120 minutes. The thing is that no one would have said, I need someone to invent an MP3 or an MP4, and then I need somebody else to come up with a way to carry that around so that you can put your entire music system onto a single device that's, the size of a small kind of packet or something. And then we kind of go to streaming. And again, streaming only kind of became possible as things like the internet became faster. So, Netflix, for example, when they first started, they were sending DVDs out to people. They were kind of making life easier, so you didn't have to go down to your local video shop. But in reality, it wasn't until the internet became fast enough to move digitally, the audio and the video, so that we could sit in front of a television or whatever and watch it. And so nearly every new offer, every new product is a combination of both great ideas borrowing from a whole bunch of different disciplines and whatever the technology is. And by technology, I don't mean just digital technology. Whatever the extension of technology is, its ability to sustain that, its ability to deliver that. And it still boils down to solving a problem. And then what it is are there clever enough people in my team to come up with ideas that step outside of what I perceive to be the only solution? And, a great example is, not that it's a particularly successful business at the moment, but Nokia started out as, from what I recall, a rubber plant company. So it was a company that cut down forests and created rubber. But ultimately what they did is that they developed a communication system to move the trees up and down through Norway or whatever, and they realised that they were much better at communication than they were at kind of rubber plantation management. Similarly, it is about saying, what are we good at? Where are our skills? I worked, or I did a sabbatical at Yale University a couple of years ago, and one of the things that we kind of always were doing, because this was in the area of obesity, is that we were thinking we need to bring people from a whole range of different disciplines to help us to solve problems, rather than saying we just get the marketing people or we just get the public health people. We were saying, there will be people from all over both the university and outside the university who will bring unique ideas, and it's about how we build that knowledge. And one of the areas that we kind of looked at was this idea of, a crack team of people responding to marketing programs that had the potential to cause harm in relation to healthy eating. And, if only you had public health people there, they may have kind of not come up with that idea. But if you have somebody from like an emergency room in a hospital, they might go, well, this is the way to do it. And you have somebody else from marketing like me who says, have we thought about how we might, solve this problem for people? There is a tendency for people to think, I need to keep things to myself. For me, the bigger my team and the smarter my team, the better you make good business decisions. But that's actually quite confronting for an industry that says, particularly in business, that says somebody has to make the decision. One person is the leader. That person isn't allowed to admit they're wrong. Therefore, bad decisions will inevitably be made because one person cannot make all the good decisions. You need great people around you to feed into that decision making. Mm. That was a very long-winded academic answer, but I'm an academic, so there you go.
Oh yeah, no, that's totally fine. And I also wanted to circle back to something again that you said a while ago, was this, I don't know, I guess this concept of pricing. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm trying to think of, again, how to say it in a way that doesn't just sound too, I don't know, well, just whatever be the case. But when it comes to pricing, how much of what a person or a business charges for a product is relational to how much it costs to make that product, and how much of it is just simply, this is what the product is worth? So, I mean, I'm thinking about something, let's say, I don't know, let's say a gallon of, a gallon of water in the United States is typically, you can go to the store and you can probably get a gallon for about $1. If you're buying something that's like a name brand or a store brand, is, let's just say, somewhere between 89 cents and $1.19.
Yep.
So in that situation,
how much does it cost to get it from your tap?
Nobody
knows.
Yeah, exactly. No one knows.
And that's a really interesting point, is that it requires effort to think about how much it would cost to get it from your tap. Oh. So we kind of, $1 doesn't sound like much at all.
Exactly.
But,
and that's what I was kind of wondering is, like, so for that dollar, like, I mean, and I know that one's just really simple, but at least compared to other products that are out there, or even services that businesses provide, I mean, how much of that is actually, okay, our cost is this, and if we charge this, that covers all of our costs and we're making some money? Because, I mean, how do you get to $1 rather than $5 or $10 or 10 cents? I mean, how? And I know that might sound really basic, and that's almost like if you're going to start the whole world economy over again. But I guess I'm just wondering, is that how much of pricing is just kind of, okay, well, the market says this. And it's like, well, why does the market say that? It's like, well, everyone else is charging this, so we have to basically be around that, like, give or take a little bit, a little bit cheaper, a little bit more expensive. But, I mean, I'm thinking again, if in your water section, if you had one option that was $100 per gallon, I mean, unless the water was from the Fountain of Youth or something, no one's paying that. I mean, what would be the marketing ploy?
Somebody might. The Kardashians might.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think pricing is an interesting one because, again, it's not simply, what people are willing to pay or even what it costs to produce. Services are a little bit different because services tend to be high labour intensive, and therefore there are costs involved there. A lot of the time, though, even then, in services, what tends to be is their guesses about how much something costs, and it's, most organisations wouldn't really, if you really pressured them, pushed them a little bit, they wouldn't be able to put the value on how much it costs to make a particular, let's talk about a restaurant or a cafe or something like that, how much it costs to make a particular product, like some toast and a coffee. They wouldn't really understand. So they make kind of general guesses, and then at the end of the month or at the end of the day, they go, okay, we have to pay salaries and wages and these kinds of things. And so this is how much we think. I think things are good because, there are real costs that are involved in getting it from either the river or the creek or whatever, or the spring, to the bottle, to the supermarket, to the customer. And generally speaking, it's more about what the market is willing to pay for that particular type of offer. Ultimately, water just H2O. Obviously, depending on where there might, if it's spring water or something like that, there might be little bits of potassium and blah, blah, blah in there. Most people don't really care about those things. What they do care about is what they might believe these things bring to them. So, people might believe that bottled water is more pure than water that they get from their tap, and that might be the case in many places. But it does come down to who you're pitching to. And I think of brands like Voss. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Voss, the brand, but any of your listeners, if they can find it in their supermarket, they should look at it. They sell that for a pretty premium price. I'm not sure about the gallon to litre calculation, but, in the olden days when I used to travel and I had the ability to go into the lounge at the airport in Dubai, because it's an upmarket space, what they tend to do is that they tend to have high-quality brands of water available for people to drink from rather than tap water. And from what I understand, the water in Dubai is from a desal plant, so I'm assuming is relatively okay to drink. But it creates an idea of the brand, and it fits in with people's perception of themselves. So Voss water is and your listeners could look this up, but it's in a beautiful bottle. It's a glass bottle for a litre. I think in Australia you'd pay maybe $8, so about $5 US. But it looks beautiful. There's nothing really there that kind of says it's more better, as Homer might say. It doesn't. There's nothing there that says that it's better. It's from Norway, so maybe people believe from Norway the water is more pure. But it is more about what's built around the idea of water. And, in marketing, and this is kind of comes back to pretty much everything that we've talked about. In marketing, it's a very simple process, is that you create a problem and then you solve that problem. And so up until 20 years ago, drinking water was not a problem. It wasn't really an issue, or maybe 30 years ago. For the most part, certainly I can only speak from my experience in Australia, everyone drank water from a tap. But then what happened is that marketers created a problem, which was, well, you need to drink water when you're out and about, and there's a myth that's going around that says you need to drink 6 glasses of water a day or something like that. I mean, that is a myth that is kind of built around this idea that you need to drink this much water because if you don't, something bad will happen to you. For the most part, people do get enough water each day. Some people don't. But you don't have to drink 6 glasses of just water. But nearly everybody now carries, when they go out and exercise, they carry a bottle of water with them. And, it's more convenient to carry a bottle of water from if you've forgotten to bring your own home bottle from a supermarket or from a local store or something like that. But on top of that, water is basically, you do need it, but hardly anyone is going to be on a long enough walk for them to need to be sipping water all the time while they're on their walk. But what businesses have done is created this problem, and they've said you need to be sipping water all the time. If you don't, you don't fit in. So when you turn up and everyone else has got a bottle of water, you go, oh, okay, I should probably have a bottle of water. And what businesses have done is they've solved that problem by saying, here is bottled water for you to carry around. Here is bottled water for you to take home. A different example, I'm sorry to kind of take it away from water, is toothpaste. Ultimately, toothpaste has an abrasive and it has detergent. That's literally all it needs. Maybe put some fluoride in because, fluoride's good for your teeth. But ultimately, all you're trying to do is scratch away the plaque that's on your teeth. And yet there are literally thousands of different brands of toothpaste. And so they have to pitch it in different ways. They have to say whitening, or they have to put soda, what do they call it, baking soda in it to make it feel more like it's naturey. This is all part of that idea of saying we need to create a problem in people's minds. There's people out there who think that toothpaste isn't making their teeth white, so we have to put some ingredient in there, maybe some bleach or something like that, I don't know. But they put some ingredient in there to make people feel like my teeth are yellow because I'm old, therefore I need whiter teeth because it makes me look young. They've solved that problem. And that's what marketing is. It's literally just creating a problem in the minds of your market and then solving that problem better than any other product in that market.
That's very, I mean, I think a lot of times that people in business, well, yeah, I think in general, a lot of times, yeah, when people in business, I don't think they really view things as problem solution oriented. I think, like, I mean, what you were saying, I mean, that's very obvious. Like any, like, yeah, entrepreneur that's like, oh, well, I'm in it to make money. I mean, realistically, if you're in it to make money, I mean, it's a lot easier to make money if you're in a pre-existing field. I mean, at least you know that you're going to start off at this salary and, you know, at least it's stable. But yeah, if your idea is, oh, I want to become a multi-millionaire, well, yeah, starting up a business probably isn't, that's probably not the best idea to do because, like you said, I mean, most people don't make that jump. But yeah, I mean,
and I think you know, it's highly unlikely you are going to be. So I think again, you have to have incredible belief in yourself to sustain your drive. You know, like I was previously an opera singer prior to becoming an academic, and you know, a lot of my friends are still singing and doing their bit. They're eking out an existence, but in reality, I'm sure that all of us, when we went through art school, through music school and things like that, we all thought that we would become international opera singers. But stuff gets in the way. And I don't mean to kind of trample on people's goals and things like that, but I think there are different people who have different levels of commitment to something. And the reality is that, or the probability of you being incredibly successful is tiny, teeny tiny. But if we didn't have that aspiration, then we would never have gotten up out of the savannah in Africa and looked for a better life. So it's kind of pushing up against two things, this human desire to be aspirational and keep achieving against the probabilities of probably that we're all going to have pretty average lives. So one of the things that I often say is, come to terms with your averageness, which is really hard for a lot of people. If you can come to terms with your averageness, you can actually probably have a better life.
Have you ever heard of this? I don't know if it's an actual real tale or if it's apocryphal, but there was this story that I don't know what decade it was. I want to say before the 1950s probably, but there was some company that they created some kind of, instant cake mix or something like that. And all you had to do was mix the powder. You open the box, you mix the powder with water, I guess, or milk or whatever it was. And that was pretty much it. I guess you cooked it and that was it. And this company, I don't know who it was, but a large enough company that they had some money. They went out there and they tried to market the product and it failed miserably. And I guess the CEO or whatever the board said, okay, why did this happen? So they hired a group of, have you heard this story?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, is this true? Is this a real story or is this apocryphal?
No, it's a real story. So we're talking about the effect of actually doing something. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Keep telling the story. And then
I think in this one, right, so they hired this team of psychologists or psychiatrists, whatever it may be, just academics. And they said, okay, why do you guys think this product failed? And they did their research and they came back and they said, you have to add an egg to the product. Yes. Like you have to add an egg to the making of this item. And whatever the marketing team or the board or whatever, they were like, well, why? Like that just makes this product more complicated. Like this whole product is just, it's easy. And they said, oh, well, the whole thing about the egg, they're like, well, that appeals to mothers who are primarily cooking at the time. They were saying that appeals to them because it reminds them of femininity. But then they also said that it was too easy, that making the product with just the whatever it was, the powder and the water, or whatever it was, powder and milk, that was too easy. And the moms felt like when they were making for their family that they cheated their family out of like a little bit more love. So it's stuff like that. I mean, are those things real and are those things taken into account? And I mean, is every product line, vetted through a marketing team and a team of consultants and everything like that? Is everything so boiled down to a science?
Not necessarily. Often things are boiled down to a science when things go wrong. I think that's the first thing, is that a lot of new products that are introduced into the marketplace are really just, the best way to think about it is a pilot. We want to see how it will go. Very few products end up in the marketplace looking exactly the way that they are introduced forever. The phenomenon you're talking about has been given kind of a whole bunch of different names, but its more recent name is called the Ikea Effect, which basically is that, when people invest labour into something, even if that labour, has instructions and requires a small amount of effort, people feel that they are willing to pay more for it, and also that they kind of feel more reward as a result of completion. And so, the issue is more about understanding the human psychology of people. So it's, it doesn't necessarily, it might not save you money by making it yourself, but you feel like you might be saving money because some secret factory hasn't made it for you, but also you feel like you've created more happiness because you've contributed to its making. And the egg cake mix example is a good one. So it is that thing of, labour leads to people feeling, in some cases, that the experience of the product is better. And experience is a really important part of that. But I think the other thing to be thinking about is, for the most part, most businesses, even the big businesses, don't do what I call due diligence or marketing due diligence. And this is this idea of, before you introduce a product, in the same way that you might do financial due diligence if you're taking over a company or something like that, you should stress test your offer. You should have what we call a red team, testing the likelihood of the market taking your offer. Now, you'll never get an exact answer. You'll never know 100% whether people will buy your product. But what's a really good thing for people to do is to get together people who have no interest in the success of the product and test that on them to see whether they think it will be successful. It's not something that's done in business. Like, I consult to all sorts of businesses, big corporations, and smaller organisations. And whenever I bring this up, this idea of due diligence, they kind of, like when dogs don't understand you, they twist their head a little bit to the side. And I go, so you're about to launch this offer. And I recently did an experiment, I did a study for a major bank. And I said, you're about to launch this offer, but you don't know whether people are going to buy it. And they've kind of said, we did some, did some customer research, and they said they would buy it. And I go, yeah, but, people can easily say they'd buy into this investment product without any commitment. You don't really know. So why not do a stress test on it? Why not do some due diligence? The same way you would if you got your finance people to do due diligence on a corporate takeover. And the problem is that marketing itself is often seen as something that comes at the end of a process. And you give it to them, and then they go, and I'm doing inverted commas, which people can't see, they market it, which in reality is often advertising. Advertising is such a small component of marketing, and it's such a weak motivator. Advertising has very little impact on decisions on people who aren't your customers. It does reinforce loyalty, which is good, but advertising is a very weak tool to have in your toolkit. And so marketing comes at the end often, as opposed, and it's usually advertising. Marketing for me is a whole bunch of other things, including understanding your market, working out how you're going to distribute your products, even thinking about things like pricing, thinking about who your competition is, all of these other things. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just gonna. When you said the thing about advertising, that was just something I just wanted to ask you to maybe a little bit expound upon. So you're saying, and correct me if I misheard you, but so you're saying that typically for a person who's not a buyer or not a client
or a user,
that advertising doesn't typically work on that person?
No. No, it's incredibly weak, particularly unsolicited advertising. So it does have an effect on loyalty. So it tells people who are already users of the offer, who are already relatively loyal to the offer, to the product, let's talk about it as a product, it does reinforce their loyalty to it. It tells them that they're a good decision maker. But it is incredibly, it's an expensive and weak technique to use to get people who aren't your customers to be your customers. There's a whole bunch of other ways to get them to be your customers that is often cheaper, but requires a little bit more effort and thinking on the part of the company. So, advertisers are really good at advertising how good they are. And so because advertising is everywhere, we think, yeah, it's really powerful because everywhere I go, it's everywhere. So therefore, it's important. And one of the things that advertising companies often kind of say in private is make sure that the CEO of the company sees our advertising, because the CEO of the company will go, I saw that advertising, therefore it's successful, as opposed to actually make sure that your customers who are current users of your offer see your advertising, because, it's often hard to kind of measure loyalty in the same way that you might measure the CEO and the finance directors kind of seeing your advertising out and about. That's why people spend ridiculous amounts of money, having bunting or whatever at the football game or at the baseball game. It has very little effect on behaviour unless you're a massive brand, or unless you've targeted it really well to the people who you want to see it. But even then, we have a thing called the double jeopardy effect, that a form of theory which basically says that really, unless you're the top brand, it's actually really hard to cut through, because the top brand has usually the most customers, and those customers are the most loyal. So advertising is not going to get the secondary, third, fourth, whatever brand. It's not going to get people to think, I'm going to use you, I'm going to defect from using the top brand. It's better to do other things like increasing the service quality or getting people to try your product and make that experience so positive and make it such a habit in their lives that they do defect from the leading product. But that requires effort, it requires thinking, and even the marketing departments tend to be staffed with mostly advertisers or salespeople who having supreme confidence over their capacity, when in fact, it's often more efficient to have somebody who thinks strategically and has an understanding of things like, product category and competition and strategy and distribution and pricing. And only a few companies, the big companies, have it. I could say a couple of brands that I know that they're very clever at it, and it's all built around what they understand about things like reward and stuff. But yeah, if anyone listening is thinking, I'll go and run ads to get people to buy my new product, it's a waste of money, kind of. It depends.
Well, I think those are a lot of really fascinating points. And that's one thing that I've wondered quite often is, like, let's say, especially like in the advertising space, whether it be you're running ads on Facebook or you're running a print ad, a radio ad, or even a podcast ad. And you might say, okay, let's say a newspaper, you print and distribute 50,000 copies a month, 50,000, let's say, in a week. So then you say, okay, we print this number of copies and that's it. And then they charge based on that. So they say, okay, for a quarter page ad per time in color is going to be, whatever it is, $1,300 in color. And I've always kind of wondered with situations like that, or even let's say Facebook ad, let's say, you're going to put an ad budget of $1,000 and you say, okay, I'm going to spend $1,000 on Facebook on these 4 ads. So $250 per ad. And you might have all these quantifiable things where you're like, okay, I look on Facebook and Facebook has all the numbers and they say, okay, for a $250 boosted post, I'm going to get, whatever the number ends up equating to. Let's say, let's say you get 13,000, impressions per post for that type of ad budget. I have kind of wondered, it's like, well, I don't know, what does that amount to really? And is that like what is the value of 13,000 impressions, or let's say for newspaper circulation,
And that's a good
50,000.
question to ask, but a lot of people don't ask that.
Yeah, and I mean,
And part of it is that you need to be there. If your competition is there, you probably need to be there as well. You need to be known. But often spending money on complex things like understanding your market, working out what problems they need solved, talking to customers, having more staff on the floor or something like that, they require more explanation than saying we need a budget of $100,000 for advertising. It's like you say, if you get 13,000 impressions, it sounds like a lot. If you get of those 13,000 impressions 100 click-throughs, that sounds like a lot. But the question I would always say is how many sales does that 13,000 impressions lead to that wouldn't have happened otherwise? And that's the complexity. It still has an effect, and there might be enough people who click through. And I think particularly with internet advertising, there's a kind of trade-off between just throwing the thing at as many people as possible and getting some kind of buy. The alternative is to say, could we have spent this money better somewhere else? And, we kind of talk about different stages of marketing. If your only purpose is to sell stuff, then it's going to be a different strategy than if your purpose is to develop relationships with customers so that they become advocates and then, people come to you. There are different ways of thinking about what your business is, and I think there's a very unsophisticated view of what businesses are doing to you. And on the other hand, when businesses are developing or thinking about their business, there's often a very unsophisticated view about why people are coming to them, because it requires thinking effort. And like I said at the beginning, most of us don't like to think.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really fair point. I think there's also the component of, the people that are in advertising, the people that, work for, like, you mentioned ad agencies, they're all salesmen, and their data, like, backs up sales. So, you meet with let's say you meet with a digital ad agency. Yeah, they're going to say, okay, well, this company is spending this, and companies that don't advertise are, this percent less likely to have this type of business. And they pull up stuff like that, but it's all, like you said, it's all sales. It's okay. Yeah. You need to be out there in sales and, oh, look at this ROI. And, this poll done on Facebook shows that 72% of businesses saw five times return on their investment on Facebook. Like, they pull up all this stuff, but I mean, that's just what the nature of their businesses is, to be sales, because that's how they make money, is they get other businesses to make money. So,
and they know what's going on. They have more knowledge about what is going to work than you do. So I think that's the other thing, is that this does come back to that issue of power, is that any business is going to know more about what works than you do, because you're also running your business, you're also paying your staff, you're also surviving and paying taxes and all sorts of other things. So, I think everybody should go into any conversation with any sales process being pretty skeptical and not getting caught up in the excitement of even things like statistics. There's quite a lot of studies that show that, people throwing statistics around, the person receiving that statistical information tend to trust that other person more because it sounds like they know what they're talking about. Even if the statistics are wrong, even if the statistics don't necessarily equate with what they're thinking about, but it just makes the person sound smarter if they throw some numbers around.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for a lot of people too, I mean, a lot of people aren't natural fact checkers. So, I mean, there might be a situation, where somebody says, oh, well, you try to quantify it. So let's say I'm meeting with someone and they say, I'm going to get you 13,000 impressions, and like you said, 100 click-throughs on a Facebook ad for a budget of $250 per ad. And I might say I don't really know what that means. I might tell someone I don't really know what the 13,000
Yes.
impressions. I don't know how you quantify what's an impression. Is that somebody looking at the post for a minute, or is that someone literally just scrolling by on Facebook? But then let's say, okay, I'll give you that.
Sounds
We
good.
can't quantify an impression, but if we say, yeah, oh, gosh, you can't even remember at all where I'm going.
Well, I think that's the thing, is that it sounds good.
Yeah.
And, there's been lots of research that showed that people are kind of really willing to accept information and numbers that a perceived authority an authority is important here, presents, and they're willing to trust that rather than argue back, because, again, we're kind of trained not to argue, particularly to people who seem to be doing good things for us, who seem to be trying to help us. So, I think, again, my take on it is go into any interaction, at least trying to have an understanding of the motivation of the person you're interacting with as well. It's important to be a good human, but it's important to at least get your head around some of the knowledge that they will have about what works versus what the knowledge that you have. And we could do a whole other episode on all the different kind of experiments and tricks that are used, but it's up to the individual to say, I need to get my head around, I need to practice this. I need to be thinking about what is this provider coming to me going to want to achieve from me. A great example is that newspapers, Facebook, all of these places aren't community services. They don't care about you. They don't care about the information that they're giving to you as being correct unless it has an impact on their brand. And so, the New York Times, for example, might have a different approach to, say, the New York Post because, they're two different things. But ultimately, they're trying to sell advertising. They're trying to get people to look at them. So these things don't have your best interests at heart. That's okay, but just keep that in mind.
Well, yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it's far more fair to say, this is the amount of impressions we can give you. And then the impressions are kind of a little bit in the eye of the beholder. So if you say, we're going to run an ad in a newspaper that's 50,000 circulation per week, someone might say, well, how many sales is that? And I guess the true answer is, well, that's kind of dependent upon you. What is the ad? And if you're looking for sales, direct sales from an ad in a newspaper, maybe that's not the best place to spend your money. But if we're talking about just in terms of the raw number of people seeing it and what's the value of that,
Yeah.
I think to me that sounds a little bit more honest of just saying.
Well, I think it's asking that question.
Yeah.
How many sales does that lead to? Are you willing to, instead of pricing it on the number of views, are you willing to price it on the number of sales that I make? And they're not going to say, yeah, of course. They're going to say, well, no, we have no control over those things. So, again, it's about coming back and saying, okay, well, it feels like a sure bet to put ads on Facebook or to have bunting at the football or to have a newspaper ad, but it's not. So you need to get your head around the pros and cons of everything. The issue is that in the moment of a person pitching to you, particularly if you feel like there's a power imbalance, you tend to want to do the right thing, and therefore you go, yeah, I believe this person. Never sign on the spot. It's a pretty simple thing. Always walk away and think about it. Talk about it with someone. Talk about it with somebody who is removed from the experience. So don't talk about it with your finance officer. Go and talk to somebody who doesn't have, what do they say, a thing in the game.
Yeah.
But that's really hard because you're often in the moment as well. And I'm switching between being a business and being a consumer a lot of the time as we're talking. But all of these things are still come down to being human.
Yeah.
And, I was kind of in a meeting earlier today where we became the company or the organisation pitching the idea. But very quickly I went, no, this is not a good value proposition. So we probably don't want this gig, this job. But it's actually it's a lot harder for businesses to say this is not the best way for us to spend our time running our business, because any business working or getting money from another business feels like a good idea.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, even to kind of a little bit piggyback off that idea is, and I've asked myself this is, how often have I seen an ad that I consciously am aware of is altering my spending habit? So I think whether, I'm watching YouTube or TV or whatever, how often do I hear or see an ad that causes me to buy that product or use that service? And for myself personally, it doesn't really happen a ton. Like, for example, I go to Starbucks, usually once or twice a day for a cup of coffee, and I hardly ever see Starbucks ads. Like what you said, like I'm used to, okay, they have this product, I like the product, it's close to my house, and that's pretty much the whole equation in my mind. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not
but advertising might influence that. It reinforces your thinking, but it's not going to have a huge impact because, like you say, you like what they do. It's close to your house. I mean, in supermarket studies, generally speaking, the strongest predictor of the choices that people make with supermarkets, this is pretty much around the world as far as I know, certainly in countries where cars are a big part of it, is parking and proximity, how close it is to your home. They're the biggest predictors. There's going to be a whole bunch of other things that are little tweaks and wrinkles, but generally speaking, it is proximity and parking. But the other thing is that then what happens is that you go, I saw an ad, therefore it does have an effect on me because I'm buying this product. But when you think about it, you're already buying that product. And, you're probably familiar with things like confirmation bias, which is that you look for information that reinforces your current thinking. And, you as a business, you might be going, yeah, I really like that brand and I see their advertising everywhere, so it must be the advertising that's influencing me, when in fact there's probably a whole bunch of other things that you just haven't been able to kind of get your head around because they're a little bit more complicated. Because advertising's everywhere, but thinking about the kind of psychological effects is actually requires effort.
I mean, I think about something like even, I don't know, Old Spice, the deodorant. I mean, they play a lot of Old Spice commercials on TV out here. And, I feel like, I use Old Spice. But, when I go to the the men's deodorant section, there's not that many options anyways. There's like 3 brands. Yeah. So, I open up an Old Spice thing and I smell and I sniff it and I'm like, oh, it smells good, and I go with it. Like I feel like in my mind I have to use deodorant anyways. There's 3 prominent brands that I see in the store on the shelves, and I just, maybe it did influence me, but maybe it was just the fact that it was just there. I don't know. I mean,
well, and I think that's the thing, is that it is about trying to have a deeper understanding and not trying to think that you know what it is that influences you. That's why we do studies. That's why we, as researchers, step back and say, this is useful to have Marcus telling us why he thinks he buys it, but that's not enough. We need to understand, we need to manipulate contexts, do experiments, see what factors, see how factors confound each other, so how different things influence each other. That you don't enter into any choice or decision purely driven by that single motivation. There's a whole bunch of other things that influence, and there's quite complex consumer behaviour models that we use. But generally speaking, what we tend to do is we tend to fixate on the things that make sense to us. And most of the time, the things that most people fixate on are things like advertising and sometimes pricing. Because a lot of people think I buy things because I want to save money, when in fact, for every person who says I buy things because I want to save money, I can point to a whole bunch of things that they buy that is not saving money. And it's because, it's not a one-size-fits-all, that people make choices based on a whole bunch of other factors. And I know that everybody always wants to hear what are the 3 things I need to do, but in reality, as a business or as a consumer, it's complicated. It requires thinking effort, and then you put your effort into the things that matter to you. I'm just as able to be manipulated as anybody else. I don't spend all my time thinking things through, particularly in relation to the supermarket. If we kind of go right, full 360 or 180, I tend to buy the same brand of toilet paper every week. Just because I don't want to put the effort in to think about buying another brand of toilet paper. But if there's something else, like, I recently bought a computer monitor because I'm at home all the time, I might put a lot of effort into that because it's important to me. And so it is about putting that energy and effort into the things that are important and not getting caught up in the stuff that isn't important.
No, and I think with that, Dr. Harrison, I want to thank you for coming on today. And if you wouldn't mind, how can we keep up with what you're doing? I mean, do you ever write pieces or like articles or columns that are for public digestion? I mean, I know that obviously you write academically. Is any of your stuff accessible kind of to people
Yes.
that are maybe not in the grad program or something like that, so
Yeah.
they can read it and actually understand what's being said?
Well, I think the best way is to give people my Linktree link. So I do podcasts, I have a blog, I do television, I have a YouTube site, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on everything pretty much. And they're all variations of what we've talked about. But my Linktree connection is linktr.ee/Dr. Paul Harrison. And all of my links are there, including, some of my latest research publications, as well as, more accessible stuff there as well.
Well, great. And I didn't mean that I didn't mean to take a swipe at all at your own writings. I just remember when I was in grad school that the pieces that I read sometimes just, it didn't even sound like English. It just sounded like mumbo jumbo, where it was just oh my gosh, I don't know why I can't think of the word right now. Not the synopsis, but I guess essentially the synopsis was just, I have to read it twice to even understand what the heck they were even saying it was about. So, and I know a lot of
my take on it is anything complex probably will be complicated, or anything that is worth doing will offer. Obviously, there are lots of places that use language which is inaccessible, and part of that is about kind of keeping people out. But generally speaking, anything that's worth understanding takes a bit of effort. And when I first started studying for my PhD, I used to spend often a day or two reading one journal article. So it's like anything, like the more you drink wine, the more you actually start to notice the nuance and the differences in it. It's, academic reading and academia is not easy. And that's why you have people who are experts. I would never, while I kind of have a very basic understanding around how a protein kind of works in terms of coronavirus, I would never, ever think that I'm an epidemiologist. So I think this is the other thing, is that the reason it's sometimes inaccessible is because you just don't have the skills to do it. It requires effort. But if it's important to you, then why not put in the effort? And for some people, drinking wine is important. For other people, understanding bacteria or a viral infection is important. It just depends. But yes, there is very accessible versions of my work up there. I write for The Conversation as well, which I know is accessible in the US and in the UK and all around. And that is a way of kind of making academic knowledge accessible. And even if you're not just looking for my stuff, but anything, The Conversation is a brilliant source for the latest knowledge, and it's much more rigorous than what you might get in a newspaper article or a television program.
Excellent. All right, definitely. Well, thank you again, Dr. Harrison. I appreciate your time, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care.